Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
It is a great pleasure again to have you all here. It is summer, and I was not expecting that number of people here inside the DSS, but it's amazing, right? So it looks like it is really working for all of us. So it is that's the reason why we are here. Thank you all for all of you who are watching us through the internet as well. Today we'll have a lecture from Marco Magalhaes, and it is an important topic. It is going to be really amazing for all of us. But before we start, as usual, we'll have our brother Rafael doing the initial reading and prayer.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Okay, I'm gonna read a message from the Happy Life from Divaldo Franco and João de Angelis. Do not be too ambitious. Do not let your reach exceed your grasp, tells a popular saying. Exaggerated ambition maddens when it does not make unhappiness before. Fight for what is necessary, sharing what you do not need, which is certainly needed by others. Dear Lord, our Creator, we join our thoughts in prayer and express our gratitude for being united here one more time. We ask you for your blessing, especially for our brother Marco, so that we can all understand and absorb the teachings of the gospel, the teachings of Spiritism, and feel a little bit more peace in our hearts. Thank you, and so be it.
Okay, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
All right, so today we're going to talk about, do we need to fix the camera? Yeah? You want to change the position? There you go. So today we're going to talk about the broad umbrella of mediumship. But we're going to focus on something very specific regarding mediumship, which is one of the most well-known, remembered, most well-thought idea regarding mediumship, which is give freely what freely you receive. So that message has been present in the history of Christianity long before we even discussed mediumship as we discussed today. And this is really based on building on other similar ideas that are present long before even Jesus incarnated in this planet, right? So this is the idea that you have to give freely what you freely receive, or in other words, like you really have to act on the line of charity that's coming above from you, and you have to continue that path of charity. It's been present since humanity started. Because we are born with this little seed of light that's in our brains, in our soul. Since we were first created as a spirit, as you might remember, we talked about it last time. So the last time that I was here, we had this very interesting conversation about the Genesis and how we are created as spirits, and how our bodies developed from the material principle. So when we are created as spirits, this Spiritist brings to us this concept that we are created simple and ignorant. It doesn't mean it's a different concept from what we may understand today of those two ideas of being simple and ignorant. The idea in Spiritism is that we are created as almost like a blank page, right? We can write on it. We can write anything we want. That's the free will. We have this incredible tool. So basically, God created us and give us a pencil, right? But the eraser doesn't come with the pencil. That's the tricky part. It's not one of those that had a little eraser at the bottom. You just flip it over and just erase it and do it again. It's a little bit more tricky than that. We actually have to redo it. We have to go back to the lines that we messed up and do it again until we realize that, yes, there's a problem here, and yes, I got to do it right. And you start, so nothing really disappears from your history. You just start to write in the lines in different ways until you finally create this perfection of a book that does not wipe out the past. It builds from it. During that little book that you write with all your experiences, there are some key elements that are placed in there to help us out. Because remember that divine providence or the creative thought of God cannot be me. It's perfect, right? So it would never create us destined to be in suffer or be in a wrong path always. It wouldn't. Like, it doesn't make any sense, right? So we are all created in a path of evolution and to be perfect, right? That's like a basic idea that we cannot challenge. It's just impossible, right? That's the truth. And in order to help us out in that path, we receive, as this inspiring connection with the divine thought, a seed that is the essence of goodness. It's inside of us. We can deny it. We can even if you think about the worst possible characters that you remember in the history of humanity, you may say, that's not true. Those individuals had no light, like there's zero connection to the goodness or to God. They still had. And the interesting is that you can deny it. You can actually consciously say, no, I don't want to be good. I'm going to be bad, right? Yeah, you can say that for a tiny little short of time in your existence until you're forced to understand that, yeah, there's no other pathway different from goodness, right? You just may take a little blip in your little book, right? The little chapter that is kind of dark and, you know, maybe you don't want to read it again. But eventually things will progress. So that little seed of light that's planted inside of our conscience, so that's the name of it, is our conscience. We know when we mess up because our conscience will tell us, and we'll live with that. It's like someone's like poking a little needle at you, like you do something wrong, just like, oh yeah, I did that wrong, that was not good. Oh yeah, I remember that, I did it, yes. Oh yes, I have to do it right. So it does not allow you to forget the things that happen, because you have to learn from them and you have to move on. So your conscience is the seed of light that is present inside of you, and you can't deny it. You cannot. It's just there. You can fight it. I don't think you're going to win, but it's there. So within that conscience comes a few principles embedded into it, and one of those principles is the principle of charity. That yes, we have to be living in a society, that's how we evolve, and to live in a society we have to help each other. That is part of humanity. It's not really actually, it's taught by religions, but it's not brought in by the religion, right? The religion just exacerbates that idea so we understand what it is. Many religions, the vast majority of them, right? So in every single book that you can possibly imagine, even the Quran or the Bible, or even their very old texts, for even if you go back to the Greek philosophers, they all say very similar things in principle, right? For example, do unto others what you expect others to do unto you. Is that a Christian idea? Yes, Christ said that multiple times, but it's not only by Christ, it's actually a God's idea. Christ is just the missionary that comes and says, guys, wake up. This is what you got to do. Okay? But it's been with us for a long, long, long time, right? So, in Matthew chapter 10, he describes, and I think now bringing back to the idea of mediumship, that, and you guys are going to remember this part of the Bible because it's quite the message is very robust and it marks us a lot, and a lot of people talk about it. That is the moment when Jesus sends out the 12 disciples. Well, at that time probably 11 now, because remember Judas actually committed suicide after what he did. But if you go to other texts, maybe you can think about 70 or hundreds or thousands that are not precisely described in the text, but certainly present at that time. So the 12 will be representing the closest ones, the ones that were receiving the message, prepared for it, and prepared by Jesus to continue on this mission. So when Jesus was telling them that they had to continue on and spread out this word, so he said, among other things, in Matthew, he says, go out there, drive out the bad spirits, right? The evil spirits. That's how the impure spirits, how to say. Cure the diseases, right? So very physical things, right? So cure this, do that, help people, and heal all the sickness. The sickness here does not necessarily mean body disease, right? Physical disease. It means like things that affect society in general or individuals in general, right? So deal with those problems in our societies. Go out there, spread the word, right? But Jesus, just to make very clear his point that this idea was not about the physical aspect sometimes. It's more about, like a mission, a long-term mission. He said, do not take any gold or silver with you. Do not take... And he even said, do not take silver, copper in your belts, no bag for the journey, no extra shirt. Just go, right? And obviously implied in that message is that obviously they will be provided, right, with whatever was needed for the journey. Including, for example, speaking languages that they were not able to. Right? That would make sense. So how would they expect it to go to another country that has a different culture, language altogether, and spread a word that they could barely even understand? Right? And then in the end of that chapter, Jesus said, so give for free what has been received gratuitously or freely. Right? And it's what Jesus told his disciples. And that's also in Matthew, that's also in Mark, has a similar passage. And Corinthians, by Paul, the letter to Corinthians has a very similar passage, right? We say you have to give freely. Why was Jesus telling this as the very last and most important, technically, closing argument on that speech? Why would they have to give freely that mission? Why would that mission have to be 100% free? Why is that? Wouldn't they need some money to carry out their life? But that's the argument people have. Wouldn't people need some sort of material things to survive? Right? We all do. But Jesus was very clear. Do not carry any the material coins, the gold. It's not necessary for this journey. Well, you're going to give free what is I'm giving you free. Okay? There's a very good reason for that, and that's why it's so important. And he leaves it as the last line. It's like there's like a takeaway message. The apostles at that time, they were working similarly as a medium works today. They were receiving the inspiration from above, the message, not only by their own, obviously, encounters with Jesus, but they're also being closely followed by a group of spiritual, the spirits that were helping them along the way, right? Or just think about it. The apostles, or the disciples at that time, obviously they were ready for that mission because nothing's random, right? It's not that Jesus would go to the first fisherman and say, hey dude, come in and help me out, right? That That doesn't work in the spiritual world, right? In the spiritual world, for Jesus to select those individuals, those spirits have been training for that mission for thousands of years. And they were ready for it, right? So that's why when Jesus approached them and say, leave everything, leave your nets, your family, and come with me. They say, yeah, I'll go. It's so easy, right? You just leave everything and go. Is that easy? What if Jesus showed up today and say, guys, obviously he wouldn't show himself as the Jesus, the little image of the Caucasian guy with long hair that we see, right? If someone that's directly sent by Jesus knocked at your door and say, leave everything, come with me, we're going to change the world, would you go? You say, get out of here, I'm going to call police, you're completely nuts, get out of here, close the door, right? Now, at that time, it was even worse. Because, remember this, like they had a very, very strict religious code by Moses, right? That's exactly what they survived on. Obviously, they believed in one God, and that's why they were the chosen, as they used to call them at that time, because they had principles of one God and understanding faith in different ways. So, they were prepared for that, but this is not an easy mission. Right? So they were prepared for a long time. They were really ready. They were just waiting for the call, literally, because they were ready for this. So, but this fisherman that's really uneducated, why they didn't write about Jesus, some of them? Well, because they didn't even know how to write. That's just an obvious answer, right? They barely knew how to, they knew nothing about philosophy, right? They were the simple man, the working man. And that's exactly what Jesus wanted at that time, right? But that's a different lecture altogether. But, when they selected, so they now take with them this mission, which I guess it's a very easy mission, right? You just like do whatever Jesus tells you and go out there and do it without taking anything with you. Easy, right? Easy peasy. Just go, right? Obviously not. So it speaks towards the monumental amount of faith that they had, but also the monumental amount of help they had. Now just think about it. So imagine if they're going into this mission and they're really representing all we know about Jesus, and they're walking around and they're coming into cities where they don't know anyone, right? They don't know. They just walk into a city. They don't know, and they have to spread this word. Do you see a conflict of interest if he charges for the knowledge that he's bringing? Like, remember someone, like, let me give you an example. Someone comes to you to sell you medication, to prescribe you medication, right? Say, you need this medication, okay? But that individual makes money out of that medication because he's paid by the company that sells the medication. Is that a conflict of interest? In other words, the interest of the person prescribing clashes with the interest of the same person that receives money from the company. It does, right? That is called a conflict of interest, right? Even if it doesn't exist in reality, it's a perceived one. In other words, you can look at a person that works for two, it's the easiest example, there's so many examples out there, right? But, works for two different situations in which the conflicts of one clash against the conflicts of the other. They have to make a decision biased by two different alternative pathways, right? That is a perceived conflict of interest. Would you like to know that? Of course you would, right? So the same thing for apostles. What is the conflict of interest for them? If they're bringing this knowledge, just like, I have this knowledge and I'm going to help you be a better person, but for you to give me that, I need to get some type of benefits out of this, right? You need to pay me. So conflict of interest now is represented by the financial gains involved of it versus the moral part, which is developing the moral of the individuals that are around them. That is a major conflict of interest, right? Do you think their message was going to pick up steam as it had? Like, why are we talking about the apostles today? Do you think we would be talking about them if they were charging for the knowledge? 0 chances. 0 chances, right? So that's one good reason, right? Another good reason is that now again, think about the same situation that, this fisherman that comes all around and all different villages and cities around, and they're bringing this beautiful knowledge, and they're helped obviously by many enlightened spirits. So these enlightened spirits, I think about like a easy way to visualize this is like, if you think about our own organizational architecture here in Earth, right? So say you work for a company, okay? And you're the little guy. You're like all the way in the end. You're the guy that, says hi to people when they come in to the store, right? And there's a CEO out there somewhere that's, I don't know where it is, but I know he's the big manager of this company, okay? Let's think about this. In this company, for you to perform your job, you need the support of supervisors. And the supervisors are very busy, right? They're very strict, they're very busy, they're loving, they're caring, but obviously they're not going to be out there with you if you're talking about soccer with them, right? Or, instead of listening to them, you want to have fun, right? Do you think a supervisor that's coming out there from the CEO office will come to you and spend time with you if you're not actually focused on what you're doing? Do you think that's going to happen in a company? Or do you think you're going to be fired? For sure. Right? So, in the spiritual world, surprisingly, they're very similar. In the spiritual world, there's a hierarchy of spirits that are not based on what you've done. It's based on your moral evolution, right? It's not based on your PhD degrees. It's based on your moral evolution. So the hierarchy of spirits is very well described in the Spirit's book, right? We can read about it. There's everything talking about the evolution of spirits. And how the spirits can exert influence on others, or in other words, like a power balance between the spirits, is all based on moral. That's the only rule that lives through the pathway of evolution, right? So if these apostles want to continue this job, the spirits out there, the evolved spirits, would have to come and help them. Do you think they would come and help them if they were more interested on financial benefits other than spreading the word of love? Or do you think they're going to be fired? That is exactly what happens. So, you see, you can take very, very real examples of what we do to understand exactly the same things in the spiritual world. The difference is that the spiritual world is way more involved than our way of organizing things. So think about our organization architecture here on Earth. It's kind of like a blurry vision, mirror vision of the spiritual world. So we learn from it, and we kind of implement here. Obviously, we have our own biases and our own issues. It doesn't work perfectly for us. In the spiritual world, it works really perfect because it's all based on moral values. So I gave already 2 good reasons why they wouldn't be able to charge anything or to carry any money with them in a way that, show off this financial aspects of the thing, right? So another thing is, if they are working in the capacity of mediums, because they were, right? They would come into a city and actually talk to people in their own language. Do you think fishermen would do that? Uneducated. They will be able to learn new languages within a day? Is that possible? So that is a proof of mediumistic phenomena. Now, if they relied heavily on the mediumistic capabilities to do this job, so that's what Jesus is telling them. Like, I'm giving you everything. I'm giving you the tools. What is the tool? Mediumship. That's really the tool that they had to continue their mission, right? So if Jesus is, in that passage of Matthew, giving them that tool, now, believe me, they're not going to be thinking these individuals, they're very enlightened, the apostles, because they've been working a long time for this, right? They really showed the amount of faith that none of us here can possibly grasp still, right? And they're there working. But if they let their minds be influenced by any other material aspects of the job, do you think they're going to be able to establish a very good communication with the spirits? Think about mediumship. If you're connecting to someone, let's give you another good example. So you're going to call someone, okay? You're going to pick up the phone and call someone. And this individual is, let's give you an example, a very, very evolved, extremely evolved individual that's living on this planet today, which is the Pope. Right? All we know them, right? Very, very, very evolved individual, right? So you call him, right? And you expect him to pick up the call, right? If you're just calling for having fun, do you think the Pope's going to pick up the call? No. He's busy, right? Doing a lot of stuff that he needs to do. Now, if you are someone working really, really hard to help people and driven only by your moral principles, what are the chances of you picking up the call and listening to you? Very high. He may not pick up the call, but your chances are much, much better. Right? That's exactly the same thing that's happened in mediumship. Mediumship, like Chico Xavier said to us many times, it's like a one-way call, right? You can't really make the call, but you receive the call, right? So for you to receive that call, you need to be connected and inspired by the same thoughts. Because what connects people are the thoughts. That's what connects people. Okay? So there you go. At least three examples of why the message of Matthew is so important. It's not even that you don't need to charge. Don't even carry anything you don't need. We will provide you. Okay? So in the Gospel, according to Spiritism, chapter 26, which is very interesting because it talks about mediumship in the context of the Gospel, just like we talked about today. Allan Kardec explains to us several other important aspects of why mediumship in particularly needs to be given freely, or needs to be acted on and worked on freely. So mediumship is not a skill. You know, it's not that you go to school to learn to be a medium. You're born with it. We all are, right? We all are mediums. We can develop it by understanding what we have inside of us and use it. That's a different story. We do that in the spirit centers. But the mediumship is always there. Whether you want to work on it or not, it's still there, right? So another interesting thing is that mediumship can never guarantee results of any kind, because it is a one-way call that you receive, and really you have no control out of the conscience of whoever the spirit's that's talking to you, right? Remember, mediumistic communication is a connection between the thoughts and the perispiritual paraphernalia of this disincarnated spirits and incarnated spirits, that by assembling that fluidic connections between those two thoughts or minds, they are able to directly send messages, right? So it can send message to us, it can relay that message. So if you think about that mechanism, right, how can you guarantee any results? You cannot. And if you think you can, you're in big trouble, right? Because that's the easiest pathway to be fooled by someone who's trying just to take over your mediumistic capabilities, right? Now, another thing that the Allan Kardec brings to us is very interesting. So, I'll give you another example, like very, very daily life kind of example. So if you need to do a brain surgery, would you do it at home or in a hospital? Hospital? Really? Guys, you guys are so amazing. So if you want to establish a mediumistic communication with the spirit, would you do it on your bathroom or you do it in a spirit center? What do you think is the most appropriate place for it? Good. So we all get that. Okay. It's not that you cannot. You can also do a brain surgery in your sofa bed if you want, but I don't think the results are going to be good, right? We all agree with that. It's possible, technically, but obviously survivability is zero, right? Mediumistic phenomena also can occur anywhere, but obviously risks are much higher if you're not in an environment that is ready for it, right? Where everyone is thinking in the same message, is elevating their thoughts, they're preparing the environment. You have spiritual workers that come here specific at that specific timing point just to help you guys out. So we are helped, we are prepared, we all trained for that, and things happen beautifully, and we can actually get messages. We can still be fooled in that same scenario, and that happens so many times. Not only in Spiritism, but any other practice of spiritual communication that happens in different religions. It does happen, right? But the chances are much smaller, okay? And that's one of the reasons why Kardec also brings that's very important message. If you're feeling the urge of write something because there's some type of conscience telling you to do so, just maybe that's the hint that you need to come to the Spirit Center and learn about it, right? Instead of just deciding to be the new bestseller in the world, okay? Because obviously every time you can be tempted, you can be fooled, and it's very easy to do if you're not aware of what you're doing, okay? All right. So, Emmanuel, in the book The Consoler, on the question number 389, he's asked about this too. So the question is, you know, considering that, you know, we need, and I'm going to have that question posed multiple times, because that's, believe it or not, that's one of the that's still like a very hot topic in the world of mediumistic phenomena in general, is that, you know, people need to pay for, you know, for their daily needs, right? So why is it not okay for you to charge for the mediumship that, or an advice or a consult, let's say, to someone that can pay, so you can use that money to live and also to help others, let's say, right? Let's put it like in a nice spin out of it. You're trying to help someone, let's say. And then Emmanuel uses the parable of the talents to answer that question, right? So in summary, what he says is that, you know, mediumship is just like a talent that, remember, and the talent, not the talent that our talents today, is like the talent of the you know, the coin, the monetary aspect that we're given in the parable that's in the Bible, right? So if you're given one and you fruitify it, like if you work on it and make it better and help other people, you can receive more. In other words, like your responsibility increases in the same direction of your work on it increases. By any chance that you take that talent and, instead of spread it in a good way, decides to and alternatively to like to charge or to not use it, all those alternatives, you're gonna lose it, right? So you're gonna be the individual that decided to dig down and put this talent down the floor, cover it up, just because they were afraid of losing it, and then they give back just one coin back, right, to their master, right? That's the idea. But what I really like is the Spiritist magazine, and this is the Spiritist magazine in 1864. Kardec also got that same question, and he needed to address that very specifically, right? And Kardec, being Kardec, he used a scientific technique of deception, right? What does that is, right? I know Andres is looking at me. He's probably like, "Hey, Marco, don't talk about science again." Okay, but you know, this is what I do. So I'm gonna, if you guys let me 2 minutes, I'm gonna talk about it. So when you're doing an experimental design, and you want to know if a result is based on inherent bias, for example, you're gonna test how someone responds to a light, blue light. So you're gonna turn on a blue light, and you're gonna measure how that individual responds to blue light. If I tell them that I'm going to check every time I turn the blue light on, they're changing automatically because there's an inherent bias now, because they know when the blue light's going to come, I'm going to be measuring them somehow as a scientist, right? So we use deception. So what I do is like, don't worry, some lights are going to be popping in and out. There's nothing to do with the experiment. I'm actually going to be checking how you respond to that screen. And then you're focused on that screen. And then the blue light comes in and out, and you're not even aware of it. But actually, I'm measuring the blue light. So that's called deception. So that's the only way I can get rid of the inherent bias of the experiment design itself. Because, believe me, not everything in science is correct. There's a lot of bad things out there that people publish, and it's just that there's a lot of bias and a lot of analysis that aren't done perfectly. Anyways, so Allan Kardec did exactly the same thing to answer that question. So the spirit that's called Jobard, the spirit, one medium told in the Parisian Society one day that this spirit called Jobard told them to start charging for consults, spiritual, mediumistic type of consults, and use that money to help people in need. That was like the new directive from, you know, that that spirit, one of the mentors at that time, told them to do that. So Kardec was really concerned about it, because obviously Jesus told us very, very differently in Matthew. So it's clashing directly with a direct message from Jesus. So that wouldn't mean a lot. That wouldn't make a lot of sense. But he wanted to make sure that that was real or not. So he wanted to test it. So his experiment, he called in 6 mediums, and he told the medium to ask the exact same question, but they didn't know. So the medium didn't know, right? So just he met one of the others specifically to ask that specific same questions. That the questions like, do we need to charge, you know, for consults? Like, do you agree with that? To the spirit in different meetings, right? And he told the mediums that the whole idea was about something completely different, right? So they were just said, you know, just ask this question. So he used deception. So all the mediums in different meetings in different places asked the same question, and every single one of them got the same answer. Like, no, we should never charge for anything. And that was not me, the spirit said, that was not me giving that message that you received from that other individual, right? So that's to show you one way that Kardec addressed some of the questions that we are learning today, right? The reason why we're talking about this is that Kardec devised very, very interesting experiments in that way to get answers, because he didn't know either, right? Kardec, when he started, he knew zero about spiritist communication or spiritism or anything. We didn't know. Kardec didn't know, right? So he needed to get the right answers. And that's why he refuted 9 out of 10 to make sure that he was refuting, he could possibly be refuting a lot of truths, but the one that he was writing on the paper that we're reading today is absolutely true and not false. So he refuted a lot of things just to make sure. Okay. Now that brings another interesting question. So we know that we should give freely, particularly in the context of mediumship, right? Because we can be influenced, right? Because, you know, we may not have the same type of connection that we could if we're just driven by the love and charity of the whole aspect, you know, and all the points that we raised so far. But what if someone, as a doctor, so like say I'm working as a doctor and I'm receiving help from spirits doing my job, should I charge or not? I make you guys think. What do you think? What do you guys think? That's hard, eh? Yeah. So Kardec addresses that same question too in the Spiritist magazine in 1864, and that is actually interesting. So the way that we understand this, by the message that we receive from the spirits, is that if you're working as a professional, every single time you're working, you're being influenced by spirits. So in other words, you should never charge them, ever. Right? That's not fair, right? So interesting is that when we pose the question, we think about, a mediumship and extensive mediumship. In other words, like a medium that's actually the spirit is talking through the medium kind of thing, right? But in reality, all of us, like every single one of us, is influenced. And see, I'm using the word influence because it could be negative or positive, right? Is influenced by spirits in a workplace, always. Do you know that every workplace has a mentor? Remember the architectural organization of companies in the spiritual world? It's the same. Does a hospital has a mentor? Yes. Does a business has a mentor? Why not? Just because one is a business, the other is a hospital? Does that make one bad and one good in the view of the spiritual world? Think about this. See our bias? Remember we're talking about the bias? This is called inherent bias. We all think that way. So we think that if there's a place that works somehow to help people directly, like a hospital, then they're going to be helped tremendously by the spiritual world. If it is a company that is set out to make money, then there's zero help from the spiritual world. See, we're so naive, right? We start to think we're our own rulers, right? And my ruler tends to be tiny small because that's my level of evolution, right? So I can only see with that little narrow focus, right? But every business is being helped. Now, if people in there receive that help or not, that's up to them. Remember, we have our free will, right? Are governments helped by the spiritual world? What do you think? Think about the worst government, the worst president in the history of humanity right now. We don't need to say his name. But think about him. Don't you think there's a lot of spirits trying to help out? All the time. Is there a mentor there trying to? Yes. The mentor decided to quit? No. The mentor is the same and is still there. Now, are they listening? No. Right? So that's why it's really important, for instance, and in every aspect of life, there are, in the spiritual world, remember, we're outnumbered 3-1 for them, right? So there's lots more than we incarnated. So there's lots of spirits that have specific missions to help us out. The Spirit Center has a mentor, right? We tend to listen to them a little bit more than in other places. Is that different from? It's not different from anywhere else. Does a church has a mentor? Yes, whether they believe it or not, doesn't matter, right? Are they going to be left behind just because they don't believe in spirits? Do you think that's within God's perfection to do that? Or do you think that would be quite mean from God to say, you don't believe? Get out of here. So you go to that corner. That's how we do things, not God, right? But we only think about the scenarios with our own inherent bias of letting people out and kind of pushing away people that don't believe like us, and thinking just because someone is making money profit out of a business, they're not supposed to have spiritual help. Right, so and that's what that brings a very interesting point, because Kardec brings that and say, if you're really not supposed to charge, if you're not receiving a spiritual influence, so we would never had any charge of anything ever in the history of humanity, because we're always influenced. Now, if you're not working in your profession, so the idea is that you're using your mediumship as a work now. That's a different story, right? So if you have a doctor, but he's not working as a doctor at some point, he goes to a place where he gives spiritual consults, then he's not allowed to charge, because his training as a doctor has nothing to do with what he's doing at that moment. And that's the same thing for lawyers, for anything. Maybe someone has idea of defining a spiritual consult for lawyers or something like that. I don't know. Like, a lot of things are possible out there. And I wouldn't be surprised if that's happening. But that in that particular scenario, you're not supposed to charge, because mediumship, like I said, is not a skill, right? It is a gift, and that gift has to be used and given freely, right? Now, just to wrap it up, André Luiz, and this is a very interesting book, and I'll really recommend you guys reading The Messengers by André Luiz. part of the story is focused specifically on the ministry of communication. That in the spiritual world, see, sounds similar, right? Because we have the same thing here. Remember, we're kind of copying like the spiritual world in a lot of things. So don't be surprised that our cities, it's not that Nosolar looks like us. It's the opposite, right? We try to copy as much as possible what they look like. We don't do the same good job, but that's kind of how things go in the spiritual world. And by the way, Nosolar is just like a fraction of a mile ahead of us, right? The cities that are light years ahead of Nosolar in development. And I know I want to go to Nosolar too, but you know, Nosolar is not the divine perfection of the existence, right? They have their own problems too. As you know, because André Luiz in the books, they bring exactly that, right? The way they organize themselves. You know, anyway, it's another lecture. I'm not going to go there. But André Luiz in the book, The Masters, focus on the ministry of communication. And he looks at mediums that were trained just like we go to school here, right? So do you want to work in IT? Do you want to be an engineer, work in IT, whatever? You go to school, you learn your trades, you do your tasks, you get your marks, and you got to do your board exam if needed, and then you get a diploma, and then you go to the job, right? And you go do something. Do you think that's different in the spiritual world if you want to be a medium? Do you think you go to the spiritual world, it's all like, oh, I'm going to be a medium. Please, I'm ready for it. Remember what André Luiz, you remember what happened when we got there? Oh, you want a job? Yeah. Why don't you go clean this floor here? Because it needs, see, a lot of people are not doing well. So right there, so you get your bucket, that's the water. You just wipe this out here 7 days a week for the next year. And then, that's your job, right? Right? Was he ready to do anything else? Do you think they're going to put André Luiz to do a very, very important job in the spiritual world if he's not ready for it? Why we think they would do different than what we do? Would you get the first person untrained, in your company, and you put them to do the most risky operation of your company? You would never do that. The spiritual world is the same thing, right? So they're following the mediums that have been working for years and years, decades in the spiritual world, learning, going to school, doing tasks, same thing. So if you're thinking that you're going to the spiritual world to have some fun and relaxing time and sleep on a couch and eat some kind of magic soup that you serve there, no, that's not going to happen. So I'll tell you right now, because when you discarnate, just have that thought in your mind, because it's going to help you, okay? It's true, it's going to take away at least like 50% of your shock in going to the other side, right? When you go to the other side and realize that like all your PhD degrees and all that stuff is like useless here, so you don't kind of be shocked, okay? So they're prepared, and then they have their board exam. What's the board exam of a medium? Coming to Earth to work as a medium. If they pass, they got a little cha-ching, a little label, say, okay, you can do this, okay? It's like a board exam. Why can I work here as a dentist? I had to do my board exam, right? We all do it, right? All professionals do, right? In medicine, in dentistry, pharmacy, we all have board exams. So the same thing happened in the spiritual world. Is it a shocker? Shouldn't be, because we try to think of spiritual world as something so different from us, right? But it's kind of similar. So they go there, and then they get their board exam. They come here. They kind of work in a spirit center, just like this one here, for example. We're here, and there's a spiritual world. And all of them there that we're talking about in the book failed the board exam. They worked 10 years studying, and they failed it. Are they happy? No. So they're ready to do it again. Okay, and one story when I bring up, just to finalize here, is that Acelino is the name of the failed medium. So he comes from Nosolar, come for his job here, started mediumship at age 20. That's his story. And he had all possible mediumistic abilities. He was able to see, hear, talk, everything, right? And his mission was to develop that. Just like, tell me one example of someone who wrote 400 books with his mediumship. Do you think he passed his board exam? He did, right? With honors, right? So this medium came, and then he was influenced by the medium. So people around them said, you know what, like you barely have, you know, a house and stuff, you know, and I think it's even fair for you to start charging for this amazing capabilities that you have, so you can kind of have a happy life and then, you know, do this and helping. So what do you think happened with that conflict of interest after 10-20 years of work? His mediumship was zipped. Done. He pretty much lost most of his potential because he could not continue propagating that without the help of the mentors that were really there to help. So he was talking to a lot of people, spirits that were having a lot of fun, right? They loved the idea. Ask him a question. There's like, nowadays, if you start going around the street and asking random questions to people, you're going to get random answers, right? Doesn't that make sense? A lot of people make fun of you, right? Put an accent, gets worse, right? So, you know, so the same thing happens in the spiritual world, and you get random questions, you're going to get random answers, and a lot of people like it, and you establish this very nasty loop that never ends. You ask trivial questions, you get trivial answers, you like it, they like it, and then you live happily ever after. Are you helping anyone with that? No, right? So Celino is there, and he's telling us, well, it's telling André Luiz, but André Luiz representing all of us, that, listen, work on it for the help of others, okay? And the only driving force in all this should be love. And that's why, if you're a medium, all of us are, but if you're working as one in this world, incarnated, you have plenty of opportunities to work your life just like Chico did, working 8 to 4, 8 to 5 every day, and then doing his job as a medium. As he took that mission for him, as that's how we should interpret the use of mediumship. Okay? Thanks, guys. That's it.
Thank you, Marco. We still have a few minutes for questions, if we have any. Anyone online with questions? No
Okay.
questions. All right, so then we are going to close for the passes. And then after we'll have the lunch and learn. So thank you all for watching us online, and we see you again next week. Thank you.